The holidays. The question is about the holidays. And is there any significance to them? Perhaps a Buddhist perspective on holidays. Today happens to be, for all those who celebrate it, Christmas morning, Christmas Day of Christians around the world. But if we were to take holidays in general to include everyone else, is there a significance to them? Is there something special about holidays? What are the holidays? Why are they special? Is there a Buddhist perspective? To answer that, I'm going to try to address it this way. It has to, whatever it is we do, whether it's a holiday or the opposite of that, not a holiday, most of the days. It has to be relevant to your practice, to your growth, to your transformation. So specifically in this case, anything special about the holidays? Is there something that we have to take note of? Maybe there's something really lovely in the holidays, and the celebratory atmosphere, etc., which are in many cases quite lovely. People will definitely vouch for that. People will say, yes, we really enjoy, we become better people. Well, there you go. Already it's starting to change and transform you and your life. So that would be a Buddhist perspective in approaching holidays, in approaching celebrations. Whether it's, in this case, Christmas, or it could be any other special day. But in terms of Buddhists, we do have a holiday. The Buddha minimized the need for celebrations of the different days, different, ceremonial events, things like that, where people would come and gather. He was always about, how is this going to help you now in your practice? That was his main objective. So other than the uposatha, which are the fortnightly holidays, the full moon, new moon, every 2 weeks, and because they celebrated the lunar months, so they have the 14th, the 15th, because sometimes it would coincide. The moon, it has its phases, right? Around, the 10 months, it's a different breakdown. So other than the fortnightly special events, which we call uposatha, Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha, are there, we should celebrate, because you look around and you have the Brahmins, you have the other traditions, other sects celebrating. So the people, the lay people are asking, Bhante, could you ask the Buddha, maybe we should have some holidays too? Because people love holidays. I don't care what color skin you have, what cultural backgrounds you have, what race you come from, what part of the world, continents, doesn't matter. People want to celebrate. And it's, I'll address that in a minute, but the Buddha's answer to that was, okay. You can celebrate the birth of the Tathagata, which means the Buddha himself, the birth. You can celebrate the Buddha's awakening, you can celebrate the moment, the day where the Buddha taught the Dhamma for the first time, and you can celebrate the Buddha's death. Some people just include 3 of these, not 4. It doesn't matter, but essentially these major events in the Buddha's life, you can celebrate, he says, but you can do them on the same day. I love the practicality of the Buddha. He was so pragmatic, so to the point, not wasting time. Okay, let's get on with this type of a thing. Because he knew very well how people will go into tangents with celebration. It would go and become have a different motif for people, where we neglect the significance of the day. That's why he focused only on those events. And he put them all on the same day or event or period. Sometimes in Buddhist countries they celebrate them on several days. So you have, even though it's a one day, but people will go to one temple one day, the next week, so long as it falls within a certain period of time. We're referring to the Vesak or Vesak day. The Buddhist, the day we usually celebrate also the Buddhist calendar year Anyhow, that is the big event. But as I mentioned, the Uposatha, in the numerical discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha talks about this so many times, to lay people, to monks, as to the significance of what it means within this tradition when it comes to a holiday, specifically in this case the fortnightly new moon, full moon, etc., day of significance in the lives of, well, at least the laity. Because lay people have to work, they have they have their livelihoods, they have to earn living, they have to pay for things, they have to cultivate the land, plow the land, harvest, all these things. And then to support other things, let's say their families, their children, their wives, their society, building, constructing, things that the monks are not supposed to be involved in. Their work is internal, their work is all about maintaining the Dhamma, practicing, cultivating the Dhamma, and sharing that with the world, with the laity. For that, the laity protects the monks by providing them their necessities, basic requisites. However, you already had the tradition of the Uposatha set in other traditions, because the moon, those periods of time during the month, where over centuries, over the course of time in human history, people had developed these connections and significance of the tides, etc., the moon, etc. So there is a spiritual element to that. So the holidays do and can have, let me just say, can have a spiritual nuance to them. They can. Emphasis, underline that. Why? Because it can easily turn into something else. It could be a cultural get-together. It could be just a day off for many people, where they're like, yeah, finally I get my break. I can do whatever I want. I can go and, like today, if it's Christmas, I can go, go hiking in the mountains, go, do this, do some exercise, or just sleep in. Or get drunk. Many people do that. Many families, I grew up in a Christian family, of course, and there would be alcohol on the table, even though we didn't drink, but uncles and this and that. Cousins would come, or we would go visiting them on Christmas Day. So we would go from house to house. And that would be a theme. The table would be set with all kinds of dry fruits, this and that, symbol of harvest, and then you would have different delicious meals, but there would be alcohol. Not just on Christmas, by the way, mind you. So that becomes an opportunity for people to just drink, eat, intoxicate themselves indulge themselves with food, and in this case, alcohol. Not everyone does this, of course. Let me, mention that as well. But most of the time, when you have holidays, so-called holidays, it turns into an indulgence of some form. Even in some cultures that claim that they don't have alcohol, but they do indulge. So you have cultures where they go even fasting. And what happens after the fast? That night when the sun goes down, they indulge, they gorge. They ruin whatever benefits the fast had actually done to their bodies. Where did the fast go? The 40 days of fasting, where did it go? Because the indulgence comes in. So there's a celebration. And then you're not doing it alone. That is the cultural, oftentimes the relevance that many people really see as valuable, the criterion for the specialness of the being special of this holiday or that. Because it pulls the person, the average, common, ordinary person, out of their mundane world, their routine. And people get into this automatic pilot in routines. Ever so often they want these unusual experiences. In a modern world, we have developed societies, have developed sports. What is a sporting event? That's a holiday. And if they don't have that, they will create one. Like in the United States, they have Super Bowl Sunday, or they have a boxing match, and they have this. You have in Europe, you have World Cup, for example, or European Cup, soccer or football. People come up. In India, you had, over centuries, you had Kumbh Mela and other events. In Middle East, you have Ramadan. All these, Easter, etc., Christmas in the Christian world. So we have come up with all these things. Perhaps they had a good, very solid, significant, actual event taking place. And people have wanted to mark that. But for what reason? To consume alcohol? To indulge in food? To just rest? So I'm not, for the most part, I'm not judging here, of course, I'm not criticizing, but the holiday basically, or minimizing it to just consumption. But there is, as I said, the human element of coming together, which is lovely. So in terms of the Buddhist tradition, the early Buddhist tradition, the Buddha gave very specific instructions as to what the person needs to engage in. In the Uposatha discussions or discourses, the suttas, because there's several, part 1, part 2, and in several different locations in the suttas you find them, where you see the Buddha explaining what makes it really Uposatha, what makes it not. He criticizes, for example, those people who pretend to fast, and then they go ahead and indulge in food, in sex, and they break their precepts, because what usually is expected for the person to be doing during those Uposatha days is, or fortnightly days, other than just wearing white, because that's what many people think, or lighting some candles or incense, chanting some suttas, that makes it Uposatha. No. He specifically states how important the internal work it happens to be. The Uposatha, or the holiday, is simply a conduit to help you get inside. No, it's not just about Buddhists or Uposathas. I mentioned today happens to be Christmas. One of the biggest things that happens during Christmas, I noticed this since I was a child, is this enormous emphasis on consumerism, on capitalistic. It's a big industrial operation to produce and to make people buy things. It's a have-to thing. In the United States, there was the Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, where people would storm like, Mongol hordes into stores, into warehouses, into big shopping centers, breaking down windows. People have died. Now they complain because nobody's going to storm anywhere. You can hardly find a person going out of the norm the day after Thanksgiving, because people are buying their things on Amazon. People are complaining we don't have that much, that many, demand, basically. So the consumerism. Okay, but there's also the lovely quality of generosity, which I also noticed when I was a child. There was something in the air. I could feel it in people's behavior towards each other. When I would look at my cousins, we would play. There was a certain level of, you can think of it as being on your best behavior type of a thing. And nobody's enforcing it upon you. It happens naturally. Some people have given it like metaphysical explanations. I'm not interested in that. But even later in years, in my 20s and 30s, when I would go to, let's say, during Christmas, to do my shopping or just to go to a coffee house and just sit down, I would look and observe carefully people's behavior. It would be slightly different. There would be a glow in their attitude. And the generosity would really stand out. So someone was asking me about that recently. The giving of gifts and all that. It's a consumerist event. Yes, maybe. But it also provides a person an opportunity to experience the wonderful benefits of giving while they're giving. Here's the emphasis. You have to enjoy the giving. It might not have financially, it's like an, quantifiable number, whatever it is that you're giving in a gift. Nevertheless, you might have spent a lot of hours preparing something, which was energy, which was time, and it was changing you. Let's say you were preparing a cake. You were preparing a meal to take to someone. You were going and working at a volunteer center, soup kitchen, as they have in some places in the world, to provide food for the needy, for the homeless. Well, how could you put a price tag on that? So many people would go and do that. It's a wonderful thing, as long as it's not a photo opportunity, to have some type of a commercially valuable thing to come out of it. they're celebrities, things like that. But somebody's genuinely going and doing that to feel good. So when you're giving something, this is, as they say, in the spirit of Christmas, right? When someone is giving something, here's where it can have a transformative quality, the act of giving, where it comes out of the bounds of consumerism or capitalism. When you're giving it, it has to change you. In that sense, the holiday can really become something life-transforming. And I've seen this, I've done this years ago, not just in, during Christmas or any time. Because the wonderful thing about it is when you're practicing with that mindset, every day is a holiday. Every day. You don't look at the calendar anymore. Every day is your holiday. You keep giving. Why? Because it makes you feel amazing. You bring Christmas to your doorstep every single day. I realized this years ago. And I was like, how come no one's doing this? It's a wonderful thing. And this is talked about so often by the Buddha. So many times you see this. But again, it's not just the giving. After the giving, there is the importance that he really emphasizes on sila. I mentioned about fasting, for example. Specifically, it's the sangvara, we call it in Pali, which is the restraint. What is a precept? You are undertaking the training rule to abstain from your normal, usual behavior, basically. If your normal, usual behavior involved lying, involved stealing, involved saying harsh words, for example, involved coveting, wanting things that you don't have, etc., or harming and killing people, engaging in sexual misconduct, you're saying, on this day of Uposatha, I will abstain from doing those things. Not just physically, with my body to abstain, but mentally as well, in my speech as well. Now, that, if it's being done correctly, it's totally life-transforming. So in Buddhism, as far as the Buddha is concerned, in the early teachings of the Buddha, we didn't care about, events as such on their own in isolation. It had to have a significance on the changes that were taking place in the person's behavior. Behavior is key. That's why you are not supposed to find any alcohol in a Buddhist house. Why? Because, it's like it might be a celebratory ingredient in other cultures, other places, but it's not in this tradition because it teaches you to let go of your alertness. It dulls the mind. You start acting like an animal. You start acting like a ghost. You start acting like a teenager. You start acting who's off the rails. You let loose, quote unquote, by becoming lascivious, by becoming immoral, by becoming the type of person that you wouldn't hang out with, you wouldn't want to hang out with every day. You wouldn't trust with your loved ones as in taking them home in the car because the person is drunk. So the alertness in the mind, specifically we're referring here to the sati and sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness of your behavior. So you're becoming sharper while at the same time joyful. This is key. Remember this, the quickest way, I keep telling people who ask me, Bhante, how do I bring back joy in my life? Try giving something that you hold valuable. This is key. In some cultures, more than others, we have a tendency to think that if I give something, then I'm losing something. I'm giving from me. So I'm becoming shorter on whether it's time or funds, usually, money. So by giving it to you, I am in the short. I'm in the minus. They've completely missed the point. There's a term that we use, open-handed giving. The Buddha never held one hand in a fist position behind his back. Whenever he was always giving with both hands wide open. And that's a wonderful quality to have, which can easily protect and strengthen your practice of sila, your virtue to develop. So these holidays are supposed to build not just your dana, because some cultures have gotten the dana part right, the giving, which is lovely, as I said. In Christmas time, people give, not just in Christianity, in other cultures too. But they're stuck there. Why? Because they do the dana, they do the giving, they might even feel great, they might feel joy. Okay? And then what happens? There's no sila, there's no precept, there is no virtuous behavior taking place. The opposite actually happens, where the person is acting like an animal. That's why in many places, I remember in New York City, Manhattan, when they have the New Year's, marking of the New Year, the globe that drops, etc., and they mark the New Year. You have thousands, if not more, people on the streets in Manhattan, everyone pretty much drunk or drinking, or standing next to someone who's drinking. And you have armies of people a few hours later who wake up, who go and clean up the street, and you have mountains of beer bottles, cups, plastic cups with where is the celebration? What kind of celebration? There was indulgence in actual food, liquor, this, that. There was no sila. So how is the holiday? What is the holiday part? Where is it? How is it transforming? And the same thing, you can bring it into people's individual situations, like events in one's life. So you're looking at it in a microscopically or microcosmically, let's say, onto the person. Such as getting married, right? Or an event, a birthday. How do people celebrate their birthdays? In most countries, with alcohol. A few years ago, somebody sent me a picture of their son who was about to turn 18 not in the United States, somewhere else. I think, 18. And they took him to a bar. And that was their celebration. They were posting it, they were sending me pictures like, oh, he's so great. And I was like, first of all, why are you sending me this? Second, where's the celebration part? But in that culture, that was how they celebrate. That is how they celebrate a person becoming so-called, the adult. With alcohol. So the initiator into adulthood today has become indulgence in alcohol, in teaching that person the wrong things, essentially. So this has nothing to do with the celebration that the Buddha had in mind. And the next part is the mental cultivation. The Buddha on the Uposatha days, or the Vesak day, it's not just a bunch of chanting that they're supposed to do, go through the rites and rituals, because those are things that people resonate with because they're easy. Even though you might be sitting there in a temple, him chanting that you don't understand what it is, but you look around, you're like thinking about the food that's coming after. Oh, or can't wait for it to stop, the chanting. But you're doing your part in sitting there, and millions of people do this in Buddhist countries and in the diaspora. But they have no idea what is the Uposatha. They have no idea about what I mentioned so far, about the joys of giving, the confidence and security that comes from sila, from practicing precepts, even for one single day. And then the mental cultivation. So you go beyond the rites and rituals, you're practicing sitting practice, or doing walking meditation, or sitting there on somewhere, even if you're doing the Uposatha at home. You're being mindful when you walk from one room to the next. As Bhante Nyanananda says, without telescoping between your poses, between your postures. That means quickly jumping from one position to the next without knowing what happened in between. In other words, when you're getting up, feel the texture of the chair, the sofa, or the ground, whatever it is you were sitting. And as you're getting up, check in with the joints, with your knees, your elbows, your back, your feet, your neck, etc. That's internal, but what if you turn your gaze externally? Are the imagery or images around you, are they changing as you're coming up? They must be, because you were sitting at a lower point, now you're standing at a higher point. So the sights and sounds also change. How would you know this if you're not mindful? And when you're walking, do you feel the air on your face hitting your earlobes, your neck maybe? How are your arms moving? I used to wonder about my arms every time I walked. When I was a teenager walking, on the street and trying to deliver things, especially barely teenager, like 13, 12, as I was apprenticing, in jewelry, they would give me things to deliver. Okay, go get this much gold from this place. They would give me the money. I would go and take it and bring it to my, the bosses and my boss and the jeweler, the expert goldsmith, etc., who was training me. But in between, or they would just say, take this to my mom, buy some groceries, here's the money, make me coffee. All these things had to be part of the apprentice life. But in between, sometimes they would say, go and do this over there, bring this from there. So I would do a lot of walking. As I would walk, I would ask myself, which arm is, moving forward as I'm pacing, as I'm walking, as I'm, using my feet, bending my knees. I was always curious. How come they don't match. A few times I tried it, it looked funny. People looked at me and I was like, oh, I have to stop. I'm attracting the wrong attention. But it was interesting because I was feeling different things. My hands, they never went up together. They didn't sway forward together. If they did, there's something wrong, right? But there was a coherent harmony of movement. I never understood that at the time. But as you're moving about in your own house, if you just could bring in sati and sampajanya, you are practicing satipatthana, plain and simple. So you're present. Earlier I was talking about the bad qualities of alcohol. There are no good qualities, by the way, at all. Even finally scientists are saying that. All these health gurus and human, hacking, biohacking things, finally they're coming forward and saying there's no benefit at all to alcohol. They're looking at it in terms of calories and losing weight, all that. There's absolutely none. They're damaging. Well, as far as the Dhamma is concerned, other than the obvious faults of alcohol, and not just alcohol, anything that is mind-altering, it strips you of mindfulness. It makes you subhuman. You say things you would never say when you're alert. You do things you would never do when you're aware. You hold responsibility much better. There's a grace about you. I've never seen a graceful drunk. Ever. It doesn't work. Ask yourself, have I ever seen somebody who was graceful when they were drunk, when they're puking their guts out or denying the fact that they are drunk? That's the other thing. You never see a drunk person admitting that they are drunk. And lastly, as far as transformative quality of, or the practice that leads to that transformation rather, during Uposatha on the holidays. Again, I'm just using the Uposatha as an example. You can use your own, because I know some of these questions come from non-Buddhist practitioners, some people who are interested in what I have to say. That's why they're asking. So you can use your own cultural holiday and you can apply these principles into that and gain the merits and gain the benefits of that. So the last portion of the training that the person within this tradition does, using the example of the Uposatha, is the development of insight and wisdom, the discernment that comes in. Discernment is not going to come by you sitting there doing the same old things, routines. So the holiday becomes a conduit, an opportunity for you to live a different type of a life, albeit even for a single day, which is wonderful, to give yourself that opportunity. It's a what if. A holiday is, think of it as a what if. What if I really live with the joy that I feel during Christmas, let's say? Not because of food, not because of buying things, not because of the hearing of Christmas carols and things like that, jingle bells, all that stuff, Beyond that, beyond the nutmeg-infused drinks and things like that, like hot chocolate, the weather, this, that. I'm pointing these out because they are selling points during the so-called Christmas holidays things, because I grew up in that, so I know. So you're going beyond all that commercialization and all that, and you're looking at real transformative qualities that are present if you know how to look, if you know how to use this time to really benefit from your existence, instead of dreading the fact that tomorrow it's going to be back to normal. Okay? The hangover that comes, as they say, once the alcohol is, finished, or it's come out of your system. Now you have to deal with the ramifications, with the consequences of that. And this is why a lot of people make resolutions, because around the corner there's a new year. Well, resolutions mean nothing. The Buddha also talks about it. A few weeks ago, I gave the talk on Bhumija Sutta, the discourse with Bhumija, and in it we see how the Buddha is stating there is no importance at all to making vows. They're totally unrelated if it's not being supported by intentional participation, involvement by the person to do those things. So the vows ultimately mean nothing. Whether you did make the vow or didn't make the vow, it has to do with the amount of work you're supporting it with. And then the vow itself is just an embellishment. Oh yeah, I did make a vow. But once you've accomplished it, you could say that. That's why most people will fail with their resolutions, New Year's resolutions. There's enough studies, and I've seen this with people who would come when I used to be a trainer, with these long lists of things. I want this, I want this, I want this. Meanwhile, it's January. Okay? It will be packed. The gym will be packed with people who have put on extra weight. And then what happens in February? Suddenly, the people who just signed up stop showing up. And in March, they're hardly there. What happened? So you are then extrinsically led, not intrinsically motivated. So the holidays are extrinsic events, outside events, things that have lovely cultural motifs, and they can make you really feel good about your neighbors, this and that, about the world. You start looking at the world being half full, like the cup being half full versus half empty. You look at the good in people. Lovely, lovely qualities, right? But instead of relying on a date on the calendar to bring that sensation to you, you always have the opportunity to bring that to the world from within you. That would be the Buddha's contribution here in regards to this type of a question, including all that I just mentioned about the role of giving. Because when you're giving to you. So it's not you missing out, you're giving something. I notice this happens a lot with people because there's a lot of fear attached to the giving, which unfortunately does the opposite. So now you have, if it's money, you have less of that money, plus you're like crossing your fingers hoping that it will come back with a return, a reward. That's a wrong place to come from. Because you're thinking of things being very solid, you're thinking of things from a limited viewpoint, and you're completely depriving yourself from the miraculous quality or qualities of the act of giving. That's why the secret ingredient they asked me one time when I was in Malaysia, in KL, there was a big celebration of people come and the group of monks we were sitting, and the abbot that I was staying there for a while, out of all the monks, he turned to me and he says, let's have our visiting Bhikkhu Candana say something about dana. And the whole place was, they couldn't hold the people inside, so they had done this celebration outside. So all the monks were sitting, and the laity were all around on their knees or sitting on the ground. And I said, it was a very, spontaneous, impromptu thing. I was like, okay. Dana, I said. Do you guys know about dana? They said, yes, I said, okay. Do you know about the 4 attributes of dana, of giving? They didn't know, including all the, the monastics. They were like, but it was from the Anguttara Nikaya, numerical discourses. It's a beautiful sutta I'm referring to here, where the Buddha is saying about the joys, the 4 types of giving. He says there's the type of giving where the giver is not joyful in giving. They are giving, but they're not happy about giving. So this would be with like the close-fisted giving. I'll give you, okay, fine, I'll give you a few pennies, all right. That better multiply. That'll keep you quiet, type of a mood. So, oh, you don't deserve this, but I'll give it to you, biting your teeth and, But the recipient is happy. They're joyful that they're receiving. So the benefit, Lord Buddha says, goes to the receiver. Fully. The benefit of the act of giving is missed out on by the giver in this case. The receiver gets all the credit, in a sense, of joy. Plus the gift, whatever it is. That's the first. Second type is where the giver is joyful and the receiver is not. And this happens in cases where the receiver says, oh, you're just going to give me that? That's it? That's how much I'm worth? Really? Really? And this time the benefits go straight to the giver. I'm laughing because when I was a layman and living in Los Angeles or other places visiting, and sometimes you would see people and you would, whatever you would give. And sometimes it has happened where the person looked at me and said, is that it? And that's all you had to give. And other times you give a person a penny, not $1, not $2. And they would look at you with smiling faces. They're like, oh, thank you. I would see it at times, like people would come out of a restaurant, or we would come out of restaurants, and you would have a doggy bag of food that we call it doggy bag, but I think it's not a right term. It's not an appropriate term, but that's what they say in the US, unfortunately. But whatever leftover food you had, and maybe you ate a little. So coming out of the restaurant, you had a box of food. And sometimes intentionally, people would be outside, especially in the cold winter. And you would see people holding onto their bag, going, I'm going to eat this tomorrow. I don't have lunch for tomorrow, so will be my food, which, And other times you would see people giving the bag of food to that person, and you would see the joy. It's miraculous. That event, it's whatever or however it went, their meeting, their dinner, their lunch inside the restaurant, cannot possibly compare to the joy that was experienced outside, at least in one of them, whether the giver or the receiver, hopefully both, which, by the way, is the third kind, where both the giver and the receiver are so joyful that this is taking place. And then there's the fourth kind, which neither the giver nor the receiver are really into it. So the giver is saying, I know you don't deserve this, but I'm going to give it to you because my mommy told me to give something, or I'm culturally bound to give you something, or others are giving, so I have to give you something, so here you go. Look away and leave me alone. And the other person looks at that and says, is that it? They might not be speaking it, but they're definitely feeling it. So Lord Buddha knew about this. And he says, in this case, it cancels out. It's a zero-sum situation where neither the giver nor the receiver ended up gaining any merits or even joy. It dies on the spot, the Buddha says. Elsewhere you have the Buddha mentioning how, as far as the giver is concerned here, before giving, there needs to be joy experienced. Such as when you're preparing something, I was mentioning preparing a cake, for example, or going to buy something to take to someone. There are times where you go and you say to the person, listen, I don't have money, cash to give to you. Okay? But I will go and buy you something with a credit card, which I have. I can't give you my credit card, but I have to use my credit card to buy food. So I'm going to go and buy something. Hold on here. Just stay here. And you go and you buy a sandwich, you go buy food, and you come outside and you hand it to that person. Now, while you're getting in line, standing at, in that queue, waiting for your order to be delivered to you, the Buddha is describing here the joy that has to be there, jumping in your heart. Your heart is jumping because you're now visualizing, imagining how this will land as the person gets it, receives that gift from you. This is when you're really maximizing the wonderful qualities of the act of giving. That's the first stage. So make sure, the Buddha says, that you have that happening to you prior to the giving. Next is the duration. During the act of giving, during the engagement of the giving process, as you're handing over, let's say you bought them a burger or a sandwich, or you're giving them money, or sending them a check, or whatever it is, supporting them. As you're doing that, you have to feel the joy in you. Oh, wow, I wonder how, wow, I'm doing this. So now you have two major, wonderful explosions of joy that have happened so far. One, the intention that arose in you to give that person that gift. Second, during the time where you're handing them that or giving them that. And thirdly, the Buddha says, after the act was done, completed, irrespective of time passing, it could be 30 years later, and you remember, or 5 seconds into it, as you're walking away from that person, you're so much, your heart's going to burst with joy. The Buddha says that's how you know that your dana was the right kind, because it's changing, it's life transformative. That's why I encourage people never to minimize the importance of giving. So it's not a transaction. It's far beyond that. Transaction is like just silly outside, because it's conventional. You live in a world that's conditioned. It's fulfilling that part. The actual food, the actual money, the actual support, whatever. Very important, but it's on the conventional level. What's happening underneath, that is what's important. So the holidays, I mentioned the dana part more now at this point in the talk, because many people view this season as the giving. So I wanted to highlight that and point out, okay, yes, there's the giving, but how is that giving taking place? So the how is extremely important in this. And how do you feel in your heart? Because you have to, when you have joy, you also have confidence, by the way. If you ever noticed, when you have joy, you're like lifted off the ground. You're flying, almost. There's like, you're invincible, at least during that time. So those are qualities of joy when it is experienced. And for that, you really don't need any holidays, I think, because you make your own holidays. Every morning you wake up, you have an opportunity to make it a holiday, even if you're going to work 9 to 5. Even if you're going to drive through traffic, get on the bus, get on the tram, get on the subway, or travel somewhere. And it's going to be a very busy, busy day with many responsibilities. You can still make it a holiday, despite all those outside conditions. Why? Because you are looking for those junction points in your interactions, in your postures, in your meeting people, in opportunities. When you're getting your coffee at a coffee shop and the person says, would you like something else with that? And you say, just your happiness. And you wait to see their expression. I say this because I've done this countless times as a layman. And I can't tell you how many times people would give me the look. I was like, what? They didn't get it. Like, and then you smile and you repeat it in some cases. Sometimes people get it right away. And you change the whole atmosphere. You change the mood of the person. Maybe they were working 7, 8 hours already. They're dying to leave their job. At that moment, they're tired. You change that interaction. Now you also influenced yourself because you've seen another human being now, thanks to your behavior, your action, your words, happy. As you go, they're still happy. And now the person who was behind you, who's about to be served by them, they also get a dose of that joy, of that lightness and harmony. There's your holiday. So I would answer it in that fashion. Sukhya hota.